Welcome to the SaaS AdLab podcast, where we bring you the stories of SaaS founders, entrepreneurs, and CEOs. My name is Luis. I'm the founder of Fantom Agency, a digital marketing agency specializing in scaling SaaS companies. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing Kenneth. He is the VP of Marketing over at TextRequest. Kenneth, thanks so much for being on here today. It's a pleasure having you. And I know we've been going back and forth, on emails and what you were able to do with TextRequest and really bootstrapping to $1 million in ARR in a little bit under 3 years. I think you said it's a pretty big accomplishment. That's super awesome. So congratulations on that. And let's hear it from you. Let's do a quick intro and just let us know, how you got to where you are.
Yeah, well, Luis, thanks for having me on. Glad to be here. It was about 3.5 years is what it took us, just for people listening to set expectations. So I'm VP of Marketing here. I started about a month and a half after the company launched. So was not a founder, but have been here pretty much since the beginning. And I got here kind of serendipitously. A friend of mine was helping me start the company, and I said, "That sounds interesting. I'm looking for a change. Let me join." And for TextRequest, we're a business messaging platform. So basically, we help companies or small businesses in particular ignite customer engagement so that you can get responses, you can cut through the noise, you can, and get all the positives that come from that: online reviews, leads, sales, revenue, lower costs, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the high level. And then, let me know
Cool.
where you want to go with this.
Sure. Let's hear a little bit more about, background. Like, you had a buddy who was helping the company out and you wanted to change. What were you doing before TextRequest? Like, how did you get, all this marketing acumen in order to pull this off?
Well, background has little to do with marketing. I do have a psychology educational background. So ever since then, done a lot of reading, did a lot of experimental psychology, which is great. I love that. And really, marketing in a nutshell is if you understand people, you can understand marketing pretty well.
Consumer psychology. Right?
Exactly. And it's really just, marketing is just, it's understanding how people act and behave, how they think. And then for your own company, it's how do I communicate with those people based on how my target audience is acting and thinking and feeling. How do I build relationships with them and bring them in, educate them, all that. And so if you understand people, it becomes, in my opinion, much easier to do effective marketing. But I didn't have any marketing background before I started here. I was in financial planning for a Fortune 100 company, which is kind of another guy in a cubicle. It was a good role, great company. I still do some work with them today, but I didn't want that for myself. Just wanted a change. My wife and I, where we were living at the time, we also wanted to move back to Chattanooga, which is where we are now. And so the stars kind of aligned to start at TextRequest with my friend who was starting it. And along the way, it's, kind of typical for what you hear from a lot of Bootstrap founders, or not founders, but Bootstrap startup employees, where you're learning on the fly, or
Right.
building while flying, if you will.
With startups, or like, especially when you go in very, very early, like, you're doing far more than I feel like you're probably capable at the beginning, and they throw you you throw yourself into a bunch of different things, right? So like, there's always something new to be like tinkering with, and it's learning, whether it's how to set up some marketing automation thing, or you're learning how to like, how do I make this email sound a little better so that I can get a little more clicks on here and stuff like that. So how did, like, when did you really start to realize like, okay, now it's kind of growing, like, TextRequest is growing, we're getting clients, we're getting a lot of people on board, like traffic and stuff like that. When did you realize, okay, it's time to start like implementing some new stuff?
It's a good question, because it took us a little while to find traction. So we started before we had product market fit, and then we had to find product market fit, right? So the first 6 months or so were kind of, looking back, we kind of say those first 6 months were us in beta. We started as a customer service tool for hospitality. So hotels and restaurants are thinking, text for room service, text for a reservation, or, for an order or something. And we did have several customers in that. We still have some in those veins. But what we really found our niche was in home service businesses. So moving companies, HVAC companies, plumbing, people who were getting a lot of leads anyway, but most of those leads were coming in after hours, and then they needed some way to follow up with them during business hours and actually get a response. So we got traction, the first fall after we launched. And then from there, it was pretty much ongoing. Let's try anything. So I wouldn't say there was a real point where we said, and we tried a bunch of stuff even before we found product market fit. So I wouldn't say there was a particular point where we said, okay, now let's try something new. It was a lot of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what'll stick. And then, what we did and what I recommend to anyone is whenever we tried something, we tried it for free or as cheaply as we possibly could. And if it worked a little bit, we said, okay, well, let's put a few dollars behind this and see if we can grow that some and just, keep that going. And if it didn't work at all, we said, okay, that's fine. We've got enough other things that have a little traction. Let's focus on those instead.
Right. So what were some of the things that started to work and you guys noticed it to the point where, okay, let's start putting a little bit more effort into this?
Yeah. So SEO is the big one, or blogging. It was kind of two parts. I mean, it all goes into search. People are looking for answers to their questions, or they're looking for a product to help solve a problem. But there's the one part of where there was enough search traffic when we started. There wasn't a ton. I mean, business text messaging was still a pretty new concept whenever we got going. But people were searching enough. And then we did a lot of outbound outreach. So we did cold calling, we did cold email, we did, things like that. Cold email actually was a great tactic for us. That's worked, since the beginning.
Is that still working today?
It is. How we do it is much different, and we've been shifting steadily, thank God, to a higher and higher percentage of inbound versus outbound. So today, around 90% of our sales are from inbound, which is great. But it's still effective. I mean, if you know who you're reaching or who you need to talk to, position, company type, if you know how to get their contact info and it's accurate. And if you can send them a quick message that's, I try to keep it to about 3 sentences or 50 words. 50 words is kind of the working model. I can say, hey, a lot of people we know are dealing with this challenge or problem or trying to accomplish this goal. We help them do X, Y, Z to do that. Do you want to talk through for a few minutes or see a demo of how we help? And, a calendar link in there. And that goes really well. And then you find different ways to scale it, Maybe it's... Go ahead.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about SEO. Like, so as an agency, right, like we mainly focus on paid acquisition. So a lot of inbound, we've never really done any sort of SEO. Like, that's not our bread and butter. So we don't even offer it as a service. But one of the things I noticed, especially with startups, like very early stage, right, they're still trying to figure out like who they're going after. They want to, like, everybody wants to put out content. I feel like a lot of times they get impatient, right? Like, it takes time. I think they already know that. Like, you like I said, I'm not an SEO expert. So like, if I'm wrong here, like, correct me, but it usually takes, I would say, anything from like 3-6 months to really start seeing some sort of substantial lift on any traffic that's coming from purely, like SEO performance. How do you keep yourself from, okay, let's stop this right now because it's not doing anything?
It's either you're in charge and you have a belief in it, so you want to keep going and you kind of know what the expectation should be, or you're not in charge, but you have that belief and you have to fight for it. So that, I remember we had a lot of conversations back and forth on how much of the content should be educational versus selling. And really, if you're creating content right, one, it's not just a 500-word blog post on what you do or how you can add value. It's a rich piece of content answering a question, showing how you solve a problem. And so, for instance, I wouldn't recommend putting out content entirely on 5 ways TextRequest makes your life better, But I would
Right.
recommend putting out content on a guide to here's how to communicate effectively with your customers
Like
through text, or here are text
complimentary
message
stuff,
templates.
right?
Well, it's more of thinking like the customer is who you are creating content for and about. Not it shouldn't be about yourself.
Right.
And so if I'm just talking about TextRequest the whole time, I'm doing a disservice. No one cares. No one cares about me.
Mhm.
The customers, everyone's the hero of their own story, so they really care about solving their own problems. Give me something to help me, connect with my customers
Right.
better. Give me
Make
something
it
to get a
contextual.
response. Yeah.
Is
And then
there
people want to learn. They don't want to be sold to is another piece. But yeah, go ahead.
Mhm. What does the, I guess, article strategy look like? Is it like you put out a ton of, top of the funnel, right? Like very broad stuff, like you said, like it doesn't have to do, it has nothing to do with TextRequest, right? And then you start adding more content that does. That way, they started to look into it a little bit more. But what would you say is the ratio between those two?
I mean, yeah, that's great, and it's evolved over time as our market has heated up. So in the beginning, it's exactly like what you were talking about, and it would be somewhere between a 3-to-1 and a 5-to-1 ratio of more educational top level versus more of a sales pitch.
Mhm.
Over time, the volume of search for what we offer, particularly for us, and I mean, if you're in a warm market, this is going to apply more to you, but it's almost entirely bottom of funnel. It's not necessarily here's exactly why to use TextRequest over someone else or some other option, but it's here are text message templates to accomplish X.
Right.
It's here's how to generate more leads through text messaging. It's content like that people are actively searching for, um, but becomes very sales focused because by the time you get through it, it's like, well, okay, if you want to do anything you just read about, you have to take a next step.
Right. That's where you get them.
I'll go
That's
back
cool.
real quick. You talked about a timeline. You mentioned like 3 to 6 months or something. How do you keep that going and not burn out? I would, for SEO in particular, if you're doing it right, it'll be about 6 months before you start to see anything you care about, and you should see an upward trend all along the way, but about 6 months before you
Right.
see any traction. But then I would give it a year from starting before you really say whether or not it's working. And for us, that's the typical recommendation. For us, it was about 8 months before we saw, okay, this is going to go somewhere. We really need to
Right.
invest more in this. So
So what do you do if you're 8 months in and you realize, okay, we've been wasting our time like for 8 months? Not saying that was the case, right? Because it sounds like it wasn't, but like for people
yeah,
that
what if you're in that
actually
spot?
are, right? What if you are in that position?
I mean, you bite your lip and you say, okay, we made a mistake. We got to find something else now.
Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
unfortunate. It's the everyone's in entrepreneurship, their favorite word, pivot. You got to pivot at that point.
Exactly. Okay. Would you say that like so a lot of the process, right? When you're again early stage, you're trying to get some traction, MVP, and etc. You're trying to realize who the target audience is. Do you create in this, like content specific conversation we're having right now? Do you create a ton of pieces that just go after different segments or like different verticals, or are you focusing on like one, and then if that doesn't work, then you go to the other one and stuff like that?
I have an opinion, but I'll tell you what we did first, which is not what I would recommend. Um, what we did to start with was we didn't have, I mean, honestly, when we started creating content, we didn't have a firm grasp of who our customer was or who our ideal customer was or their persona. And so we created things more around a topic. So it was okay, if you are interested in customer service, we'll create stuff around a topic there. So more of a profession than a personality.
So everybody essentially could go and take a look at it.
Yeah, and we started. It's been an ongoing. This is an ongoing thing for a lot of people, but we try to be something to everyone. And you're not going to do very well if you're trying to be something to everyone. I mean, the old cliche is true. You need to be really
Yeah.
valuable to a few people. And so over time, we changed it up to where we were more industry focused. So we would create content specifically for folks in the HVAC industry or specifically for recruiters or you name it. I mean, we work with 100 different industries now. So there were plenty of opportunities and it worked well enough for us. And now what I would recommend is focus on real customer conversations. I mean, especially if most of the people listening to this are founders, entrepreneurs or in the
Mhm.
C-suite. You need to be having customer conversations as often as you can because it's going to lead to a better business in general, but it also makes it really easy to create content around specific personas because you could just take someone you recently talked to. You could just say, okay, Mark, I'm just going to write this like I'm talking to Mark and answer the questions he had.
Yeah,
And I'm going
I
to put
like
that
that.
out there. And that's going to be really effective.
Hmm. That's good. I like that a lot. What else? Like, so we talked about something that worked, right? Like, what was something that hasn't been successful?
Well, there's a lot of things too that were not successful or we had pretty poor results from the first time or few that we tried them, but now are really effective. So something in general I would recommend when bootstrapping is if you try something once and it doesn't work, table it for later. It might
Right.
work when you're at a different stage of your company.
Mhm.
One of those being trade shows. We spent a lot of money to go to trade shows. They weren't very effective for us. I mean, you have some good conversations, you get a couple customers, but often, I mean, between the trade show materials or the booth setup and paying for sponsors, yada yada yada, um, it's pretty easy to drop 5 or 10 grand on a trade show. And in SaaS, I mean, you better know what your cost per acquisition is going to be per customer, your lifetime value, in order to make up for that, right? So
Right.
we serve more enterprise now, but primarily then very small business. And so when you're selling software for $50 a month, 10 grand for a show doesn't make sense. But these days, it's one of the best ways that we can get in front of targeted partners and some of those larger companies because they're so busy all the time doing everything else that you have to get that face to face time.
Right. That was going to be my question. Because I feel like I don't know if this is what everybody thinks, like maybe it's just my opinion, but I think that when you're talking about trade shows, like you're definitely dealing with like you at least maybe you're not, but you want to be dealing with like big annual contracts compared to, oh, let's just do a month to month thing here for like you said, like $50 a month is like it's not gonna work. I'm sure it has for some people. And I think that's where the like very niche comes into play. But I think you hit the nail on the head on that. Or like unless you're like really, really know who you're going after and the right person is there for you to meet, make an introduction, make a good impression on the company, maybe it's something to stay away from. And I don't think I've had a lot of people say that that's been one of their tactics, which is interesting. Um, why did you guys first try it?
I think I think it's because it was a concept we were already familiar with. Well, there's a few pieces that go into it. One concept we were already familiar with because of the team we had and the kind of businesses we'd been a part of before and the kind of work we'd done. Seemed an obvious choice to try it, among other things. But it was also something where we knew we could get in front of 500. We could have 500 customer conversations in a weekend or on an average Tuesday, and we would learn a lot. And so something that was kind of a mistake that we made that now is just part of our process is we would go to these much larger shows to see if it was going to be a good industry or a good fit for us, whenever we were trying to find that product market fit. Now we have a good product market fit. We know our personas. We know who's going to succeed, who's not going to do so well. But there are still new industries or new niches that we come across. And we found that regional shows, or even just like Chattanooga might have a show for some random, industry, or Knoxville might just up the road. And those are only going to be a few $100s.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly as you grow, you're more willing to make bets. You kind of have to make bigger bets to
Yeah.
get bigger payoffs. But then also it's a pretty low risk spend in general. If you can spend, call it $500, talk to 40 or 50 people in a day or two. I mean, that's really valuable in general. And then you can see, okay, is this somewhere where we could get traction? And then if you get one customer from it, your costs are covered. So you don't
Right.
need anything big. So I do recommend small regional shows. I see so many. I'm not saying your listeners will do this, but I see so many entrepreneurs, particularly first time founders, who just get starry eyed, like, oh, we're this amazing startup. And maybe you are. They think we're amazing. We're creating a revolution. Let's go to these large conferences and really show off. And what they do is they just waste a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So do the opposite of that.
Start small, baby steps.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. You brought up bets, and I like that a lot. What's the craziest bet that you guys have taken on?
It's very industry specific, but everyone will be familiar with it. Was jumping into the political texting space.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone, it's funny now because whenever we got into it January of last year. So like right as things were starting to heat up, or that's when we pushed
Yeah.
our peer-to-peer product. Beforehand, we were just all, um, you know, business to consumer or business to customer conversations and updates, basically, or promotions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was a huge bet. We put a ton of our internal resources to it, so time and dollars. Really invested in that one industry. It did pay off very big, as anyone who was in America this past year knows. We all got 100 messages each.
Yeah.
And there's some pieces there, like there's some things that definitely should have been done better. But in general, like texting for get out the vote efforts or for raising funds works, and as long as there are some bad players, but as long as people are being compliant and being respectful, if you get more people involved in democracy, that's a great thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a huge bet. We sunk a ton of resources into it, but it did pay off for us. Another huge bet has been Google Ads, which this
Mm-hmm.
goes back to asking about things we tried that didn't work. The first 5 or 6 times we tried Google Ads, it didn't work at all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we could
You know
get some
why?
traffic. Yeah, a few things. One, we didn't know entirely what we were doing. So Google Ads is really Google in general is really set up to get you to spend more without giving you anything in return.
Yeah.
Facebook's the same way. So there's some of that you have to learn through, and thankfully, or wade through, and thankfully we have a good, well, actually he's best friends with our marketing coordinator, which is really convenient. But I had a referral, someone who was an expert in PPC that could really help us out and point us in the right direction and kind of coach us along.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really helpful. But there were other things, like our website was not good.
Oh, nice.
It didn't answer. Yeah, well, things like it wasn't quick enough. It didn't answer the right questions that people had whenever they were coming in, or the keywords we were targeting were super expensive. So I mean, targeting business text messaging back then, because we weren't set up properly, would cost us $40 a click.
Yeah. That's a
You're not,
lot.
yeah. I mean, you can't spend $40 a click and sell software for $50 and make that up. It's just not
Unless
going
you're
to happen.
unless you're selling these politic contracts, it's not going to pay off.
It did, yes, that is true.
That's funny. Um, if you could go back to like 1 year into the company, what would you have done differently?
I love this question. There's just as an aside, a lot of times whenever we're talking internally, or like me and the three founders, we talk about, man, if we had just known then what we know now, we would have hit whatever goal in half the time. And then anyway, it's just a fun internal thing. Um, I would have, in general, there's a lot we would have said no to. We wouldn't have tried as many things to try to figure out what worked. Obviously, we would have already known. Um, I think we would have doubled down on organic and website optimization in general. So not just, having the right keywords on there, but really building out a website that makes you look like an expert,
Mhm.
that answers people's questions. Particularly the big three of what do you do? Do you work with other people like me, and what does it cost? And making that really simple. So I think we would have spent more time and effort there. Um, but there's a lot too that just takes time. I mean, there's some things that we've either recently pushed out or are pushing out soon that have been on our plan or our roadmap for years, among a million other things. And sometimes it just takes time to get there. So we're talking about bootstrapping here, but you so think of it, your two main resources are time and money. If you don't have a lot of money to spend, you have to be willing to spend more time, and that's fine. It's also the reverse. I mean, if you go the VC route, and you have a lot
Right.
of money, well, okay, that should save you a lot of time. Um, but you need to understand that up front, right? Like you can't say, oh, I'm going to have this growth hack and then everything's going to be great next week. Actually, that's something we would have said no to from the start. It's just anything
Right.
that says growth hack. Yeah, anything related to the term growth hack, I'm just going to ignore that.
Throw it out the window.
Mm-hmm.
That's funny. I feel like for a little bit, growth hacks had a very good connotation, and it just completely switched in the last couple years. And I find that very interesting. It's kind of like, if you're familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk, which you probably are, right? Like, he was the big thing. I mean, he's still like, I don't know. I don't follow him a ton. Um, but he was, like this huge thing, and now everybody's all against like hustle porn and all these different things that he kind of is like the epitome of. I see that very similarly to like what's happened with growth hacking, and I think it's interesting. Bit of a
And I think
tangent.
I think what started there, because I'm on the same boat with all of that. I think there's like one, for the hustle doctrine, it's kind of okay. That's helpful, but you have to also take care of yourself, or you won't be able to work extra.
Right.
I often say, people talk about startups and like, oh, do you enjoy not being like a regular employee? And I'm like, well, I mean, if you want to get out of the 9 to 5, you have to be willing to work a lot of 8 to 8s, and that's
Yeah.
just kind of the concept. You do have to do more to create other opportunities. But then the growth hack thing I think is interesting too, because it started as a way of saying, what is something you can do that will scale on its own or will grow exponentially on its own?
Right.
And somehow it evolved into, what are these little tools or like, what are these little tricks you can do to kind of game the
Yeah.
system?
What's the next
And there was
tool
a
to like
huge thing.
scrape leads?
Yeah, exactly. Or what's like, we've all seen this, hey, join my webinar on Facebook ads. I'll show you how I made 50 million by spending $125,000. And it's,
Yeah.
some garbage pre-recorded thing that they loop you into that offers no value to anyone. I'll stop there.
Okay. Yeah. What is we'll switch the gear here. We've got a couple minutes left, but a couple more like personal questions that are fun. What is your favorite movie?
Probably Ocean's 11.
Okay. Why is that?
The dialogue between George Clooney and Brad Pitt is unbeatable. That dynamic is great. I watch it probably twice a month, and it still cracks me up. That's a piece of it. But then, I mean, you have that many legends in one film, and if the
Yeah.
writing is good and the directing is good, which it is in this case, you're not going to go wrong.
Yeah. That's a
It's
good
also a
movie.
remake, so they knew it was going to work.
What about any hobbies that you have?
I'm not too exciting. I do play a lot of guitar. I do read a lot of books. My wife and I, well, Chattanooga is a great outdoor city, so we spend as much time outdoors as we can. During the winters, it's more movies and cards. But
Yeah,
yeah, that's me.
that's cool. I love reading too. What's your favorite book so far? I feel like that changes.
Yeah, well, I'll favorite is tough, but the ones I recommend the most are one is boundaries. That's probably the top one. And it's Doctors Cloud and Townsend. I forget their first names. There's that one. I recommend a lot of Malcolm Gladwell. Talking to Strangers. This is most recent.
That's one of my favorite authors. Love him.
I'm a huge fan. He's who really got me into writing, was reading his and saying, okay, every time I read a paragraph of his or read a page of his, no matter how tired I am, I want to read the next paragraph. How do I make other people do the same whenever I write? So there's that. Grit by Angela Duckworth is another one I recommend all the time. I only read that one last year, the year before.
Yeah.
But those are up there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I just remember that you mentioned you had that psychology background. So I'm probably gonna email you and ask you, pick your brains a little bit, because I'm a big fan of that stuff too. I really like it. So definitely ask you for like some recommendations on books. But Kenneth,
yeah, sure.
Thank you so much for the time. It was a pleasure having you here, and thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it as well.
Where can people find you online?
Easiest way is connect with me on Twitter. I'm at Kenneth Burke 423. My DMs are open. Ask me anything. But then, LinkedIn, it's Kenneth Burke as well. You can connect with us at TextRequest. Go to TextRequest.com, or most of our handles are, at TextRequest. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for everyone that's watching, listening. Make sure you like, subscribe, give us a rating if you liked the episode. And don't forget to check out Kenneth and TextRequest. Thank you so much again, and we'll catch you soon. Take care.